the Spirit Speaker KC podcast. I am psychic medium Jamie Collins. Thank you for being here. I we kicked off last the season 2 opener with Randall Blackman last week, and I thought we'd get back to a little bit of mediumship today from the teaching standpoint of it. And one of the things that I told you that comes across, I get some ideas for the podcast is through my development circle. And if you don't know, twice a month I have a development circle for those that are interested in developing their mediumship, have curiosity, maybe have had experiences in their life, and just want to have a place where they can come and develop their mediumship. Where we've actually finished for the season, and we will be getting the circle will start back up in August. So this is just a little side note for those who've ever thought about developing their mediumship. We shut it down for the summer. People are busy and active and being outdoors, and no one wants to come to class twice a month in the summer. So we'll get started back up in August for the development circle. But one of the topics that came up in circle was this topic of habits in mediumship. Habits, habits, habits. And what do I mean by that? And I think what happens sometimes, if you've been doing your mediumship for a while, you can get into habits, meaning you bring through the same information in all of your readings. Where reading should really be different. I always consider a session like a fingerprint. They're all different. There may be some similarities in sessions, but what I have found is really every session is unique in its own way, like a fingerprint. And that's one of the things that keeps me excited about being a medium, because I think if it was the same old, time and time again, we'd get kind of bored of that. But what can happen with mediums, not so much when we're developing, but even though it can start there, but maybe you've been working at your mediumship and you get habits. And that means you're bringing through those same things in every session. You might, in every session, bring through how that loved one passed, what took them to the other side. Every session, you may talk about a significant thing like tattoos. Maybe every session, even though that loved one may not have had a tattoo, or someone here in the physical had a tattoo, you bring that up every time. So this is what I mean by habit. We give the same evidence in every session. And we've always talked about this, that, that we really have to follow the lead of spirit. And we should not be bringing up the same information over and over again. And so that's what I mean by habits. And I think there are a few reasons why we get into these habits. I jotted some notes down, but I think one is, if you've ever seen any of the other episodes, we've talked about in mediumship, the checklist. Some teachers, mentors, tutors out there will teach the checklist. Like, every reading, you should be, man or woman, how did you die? What was your career? They have this checklist approach. What was your age? Those types of things. And even though I do find in mediumship now that I shouldn't say most, I don't know that, a lot of teachers are getting away from the checklist approach, that this is what every reading should have. But just in case, I think that is one of the reasons why we can get into habits, or bringing through the same information in every session. It's because we were taught that checklist approach. And as I've discussed in previous episodes, I've never been a big believer in checklist approach. In fact, that I can think of off the top of my head, none of the teachers that I've been taught by have ever given this checklist approach. They're really anti-checklist in a way. So that could be one of the reasons why you get into habits or bring through the same information in every session. Another reason I feel like that habits will come through with mediums is when you're in a session and you get stuck or you feel like information isn't coming through. It's that part where you think, oh gosh, did spirit leave me hanging? I'm not sensing spirit here. So when it goes radio quiet, radio silence, and you're not getting anything and you get stuck, we'll retreat back to what we've always done. So maybe if you haven't brought through how they died, because again, everyone's habit is going to be different. So I know myself, I've caught myself when I go back and listen to some of my sessions, I'll be like, yeah, why am I doing that? Why am I constantly, or consistently in every session bringing this up? So I really feel like when we get stuck or where it gets quiet, will retreat. It's kind of like we will use it as a safety net. I'm not getting anything else. I'm stuck. And let's face it, a million and one things could be happening. That communicator, the first communicator left, and another communicator is entering into the session. So there can be lots of reasons why we get that quiet or we don't hear anything. But I'm a big believer in one of the main ways we go back to habit is when we get stuck. Okay. I think we've all experienced that. If you're a medium and you're giving a reading, you're in a session or a practice session, and all of a sudden it gets quiet and it's a safety net. So I'll go back to something that I'm familiar with. Um, Another thing is why we may develop habits in mediumship. We think the medium thinks it's good information. You think that every session you need to bring through how somebody transitioned, crossed over, passed away. No, every session you don't have to bring through how somebody crossed over. So it's one of those things where you think it's good information. You think it's good information to give a name. So you try for names in every session. So what I'm saying is we're not the judge of what is good information. We being the medium, we're not the judge of what is good information. I'm always a believer that the best judger of information, what is good information, is the spirit communicator. They're bringing through what they want to give to their loved one, and I can't judge it. I may be in a session and they're talking about roses and butterflies. And in my mind, I'm like, oh gosh, not flowers again, not butterflies again. But just because I don't think that's really good information, what if that rose is a key thing to their loved one who's sitting with the medium? What if the butterfly really means something to the sitter, to the client? So I can't be the one who thinks that I know what good information is. And so we can get into that habit as well as mediums, that we think we know what good information is. And I'm really a believer that as a medium, I'm simply giving to the sitter, giving to my client what spirit is giving to me. I don't judge what the information is that's coming through. I don't know what good information is. To me, I'm neutral. I don't know if it's good information, bad information. If I'm truly, as a medium, following the lead of spirit, I don't judge, evaluate the information that's coming through, because only the sitter, the client, knows what is good information or what information is relevant to them. So that's another thing that I feel like can get us into habits. We think we know what good information is. Um, we give information. Another thing that can get us into habits of mediumship. We think this is what the client wants to hear. We feel like, oh, well, I know the client wants the name. Again, it kind of blends with what I said is we think we know what's good information. But this is where we feel like we are determining what the client wants to hear. The client wants to hear how their loved one passed. And I'm just a believer, we don't always have to bring up how someone passes. Um, their loved one knows how they passed. We don't have to bring it through, but it's one of the things that we'll get in mediumship quite a bit. And I'm not saying, I think this is really important. I'm not saying any of those things are bad information in and of itself. We just have to remember that we catch ourselves where it's not becoming a habit and we feel like we have to give it in every session. So again, that last one is we think it's information that the sitter wants to hear. No, because then what's that? All of this is a little bit of what we've talked about in previous episodes of we, the medium, being in control. And we've talked about surrendering, that as the medium, I'm just the channel for spirit. I'm not in control. I surrender my ego. I get out of the way. I have no expectations whatsoever. I just give what spirit gives me at the end of the day. And so when we get into habits, if you really think about that as a medium, it's us taking control. And I'll be honest, I never want to be in control in a session. I really want to be in a state of surrender and letting spirit know that they're the ones in control. I surrender to them and I will give to their loved one whatever it is that needs to come through. That's that's really it. Um, so those are a few things that I feel like how we can develop habits, why we give the same information in every session. And it's one of those things that you really have to catch yourself. That's why I'm a big proponent, I'm a big believer in recording your sessions. So you can go back and look and say, okay, did I give this last session and this session and this session? And am I doing that? And I don't even realize it because it's like a lot of habits. You don't even realize you're doing it. In life, somebody says, you say that a lot. And you're like, no, I don't. And so that's what I mean. Sometimes with habits, we don't even realize we're doing it. And so that's why I'm a big proponent of recording your sessions for lots of reasons, but one of them, so you can see if you are getting into this way of having a habit in mediumship. So not from that, what can cause that habit, have the checklist when we feel like we're getting stuck, we're not getting information from spirit. We think it's good information. We give it because we think we're comfortable and we think it's good information. And we think the loved one, the sitter, that's what they want to hear. And at the end of the day, ask yourself, Am I being in control, or is spirit being in control? How can we change? That may be one of the things you ask. How can I change? How can I make sure that I'm not being uh, getting this habit in my mediumship of doing the same thing? I think one of the things, and I want to preface this again because it's really about following the lead of spirit. Everything that I say, it's about surrendering, not being in control, and letting spirit lead the way. But sometimes we have to be able to also think outside the box. You know, uh, don't anything spirit, we never know what spirit's going to come through with. It could be anything, but learn to stretch imagination. Remember, this is where mediumship, this is where connecting with spirit comes from, is the right side of the brain, where imagination is, creativity is. The left side of the brain is that ego and checklist and having a certain way of doing things. But when we're truly connecting with spirit, it's the right side of the brain. That's where we're connecting with spirit. We're using that imagination. And so sometimes we have to stretch our imagination. We have to think outside the box. And that doesn't mean forcing it or just giving random information so I can think outside the box. It's setting that intention with spirit. So, spirit, I've been listening to my sessions, my readings, and I find that I'm always giving the cause of death or whatever it may be. I'm always talking about their job or their career. I'm always talking about their favorite hobby. Those have become habitual with you. So set the intention with spirit and say, spirit, I've been doing that a lot. Can you help me where I don't give that, unless it's really necessary? Again, remember, I said, I want you to know, of course, we're following the lead of spirit, but I'm a believer that we can have all the teachers and mentors and all the world, but the greatest teacher that we will have will be spirit. I've always believed that. So I'm all about setting intentions with spirit, even asking spirit, hey, what do I need to work on? Or give me some things that I need to work on. Spirit, I don't, in this session, I don't want to give how they died. Let's focus on personality. Let's focus on practical evidence. And even though that may be a little bit more difficult, you don't want to work on that in a paid session where someone's paying you their money. But if you have opportunities to practice, I've given this to students before exercises, and I'll say, okay, we're going to give your practice reading today, and you're not allowed to talk about how they passed. And then, inevitably somebody will say, well, what if spirit gives that? Nope. Spirit knows we're here to learn today. So spirit won't give you the way that they passed. And if you sense that as a safety net, or because you're not feeling anything, just avoid it and move on. Okay. So, one of the ways how we can change, that's number two. First way is think outside the box, use your imagination, stretch yourself, stretch yourself, set the intention with spirit that you'd like to work on things. And remember, we always talk about if we're sitting in the power or spending time with spirit, that's an opportunity for spirit to work with us. They're working with us even when we don't realize it. But in your practice sessions, work on those things. Okay. Don't talk about career if you always talk about career. Don't talk about how they passed if you always talk about past. Don't talk about age if you're always giving an age. So, in your practice sessions, use those as opportunities to stretch yourself and try new things. And spirit, I promise you, spirit will work with us when we do those things. At the end of the day, we just have to trust spirit and follow the lead of spirit. And I don't want you to think that Jamie says you can never give the way that they passed or their age or their career. That's, please understand, that's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is if you find yourself in your sessions when you record them and you find yourself giving the same information over and over again, that's when you know something has to change. I need to practice this better. Okay. And it's real easy to get into that rut. It's real easy to get into that rut, but it's really one of those things that we just have to practice. We have to develop. And that's why I talked about the development circle. I know sometimes it's hard to get an opportunity to practice your mediumship. And that's where a development circle really comes in handy because it gives you an opportunity to work at your mediumship in different ways. And you have a teacher, you have me when I'm listening to your readings or things like that and say, you know, hey, you've been doing this over and over again. So I hope that helps. I think we all do it. Like I said, I've caught myself doing it. I've always said I'm not perfect in my mediumship. I'm always looking to grow and develop in my mediumship. And sometimes we just get into a rut. And I think we can apply it to a lot of things in life, whether it's when we're at work or something with our family or friends. We get into a rut and we get into these habits that we don't even recognize, and that goes into mediumship just as much. And so it's one of those things. If you just practice, I promise you, you'll get better, and you'll be really surprised if you're doing it. I hope this episode was helpful. I wanted to mention that if you are out there and you've been wanting to learn how to connect with spirit, a couple things keep you'll always be able to check my website for the development circle coming back up in August. On Saturday, May 16th, I'm having a 4-hour workshop called Connecting to Spirit. If you've kind of been out there and you're kind of been wanting to learn a little bit about connecting with spirit, mediumship, and you don't know where to turn to, this is a really small beginners kind of workshop out there for folks to learn how to learn some terminology, learn how spirit connects, how we do connect with spirit. And like I said, that Saturday, May 16th, it's called Connecting to Spirit. You can find that information at my website. Also, go check out my other episodes of my podcast on my YouTube channel at Spirit Speaker KC. I'm also on Spotify at Spirit Speaker KC. Please like and subscribe to the channel. And again, if there's ever topics that you would like me to talk about, please let me know. Sometimes I'm racking my brain trying to figure out what to talk about. So if ever you think of anything, let me know. Thank you so much, and I will see you next time.